Today on the MrMaple Show podcast, we count down Ultimate Collector Bryan Rule's top 25 Japanese maples.
Howdy, and welcome to the MrMaple Show. Get excited. We've got Bryan Rule in the house. Y'all, we're MrMaple.com. We are the Japanese maple nursery with over 1,000 cultivars of Japanese maples. We mail order Japanese maples directly to your door, and we do a weekly podcast so you can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and we do daily YouTube videos. So with this video we're doing today, there'll actually be a YouTube component that airs on Sunday. So you'll have to check that out as well because there'll be some photos associated with this video. We've never shot a top 5 like with Bryan Rule. And Bryan said, guys, you know, it's going to be hard to do a top 5. What about a top 25? And so we said, what an awesome idea for a podcast. So Bryan, thanks for jumping in today.
Man, I'm excited, as always, to be a part of the MrMaple Show. I really love doing these podcasts as well. It gives me a chance to just chop it up with Matt and Tim. So I'm always excited about that. And if I can just hang out and talk about plants, my favorite plants, I mean, we could do this all day. So, yeah, I'm excited. I've got a great list of plants today for you guys. It was really hard for me to narrow it down to even 25. You know,
I don't know how you've done it because I've never officially put together a top 5 or a top 25 because it changes so frequently.
It is a challenge.
And then if you do it in the spring versus the fall,
right?
You know, as someone who's in it daily, it's kind of hard to do.
It really is. You know, I think this list here could fluctuate a lot during the different times of the year, and then deciding, whether you're talking about japonicums or palmatums or sabodan, like there's so many different factors and variables into it. So I took my time and really tried to put together kind of a diverse list of my favorites, and tried to cover a lot of bases because I think as a collector, for a long time, I'm looking to kind of cover all of those amazing characteristics that you get from so many different Japanese maples.
Now, if you don't know anything about Bryan Rule, he's been a collector in Japanese maples for a number of years. It started out with his journey in Oklahoma. It ended up here in North Carolina. We've got some videos and some podcasts about that.
Yeah.
And Bryan is just such a good friend to us here at Mr. Maple. And it's kind of crazy that you've never done a top 5 because many videos that you've been in.
Right.
But it's also crazy that we've never shot one of these as a podcast. So This is one of the very first podcasts as a top 25.
I like it.
For one particular person.
Yeah, for sure, man. Whenever we came up with the idea, I was like, man, I'm down. I was excited to do it. We got some great plants we're going to talk about today. And I got you chopping it up with me. This guy's the maple expert. I'm the maple collector, so I think combined here, we're going to bring the heat for you guys and talk about some really amazing trees that I think everybody needs one of these in their garden. That's kind of how I was building my list. I'm like, if I had to just pick 25 Japanese maples, how could I do that? And I think I got the list.
So I think the suspense is killing everybody. Let's break into the list. Number 25, Bryan, what do you have?
All right, so number 25, we have Acer japonicum Indian Summer. Now, this may be a surprise to some listeners who know me personally because this is a very big favorite of mine. I love japonicums for one. There's so many great cultivars, so it's really hard to narrow that down. But Indian Summer was one that I got kind of early on when it wasn't really available, and I had it back in Oklahoma, and it was just really just stood out to me. It separated itself from a lot of the other japonicums. And then when I came out here, we got a huge set of them in, and they were just in the most perfect fall color I'd ever seen in my life, and it just blew me away. And immediately I was like, this is why I love this cultivar. Indian Summer is just amazing.
It was a calico of colors. And that's what that tree does in the fall. Is on the same tree, you will get yellows, oranges, and reds, and even some shades of green, just sort of calicoed all together in this big portrait that is just beautiful. And it's not like there are streaks across each and every leaf. It's like sections of the tree all turn to fall color at different times in different ways. It's outrageous.
It's really spectacular. I mean, I think, when we all know japonicums have that, they have that special sauce when it comes to fall color, but I think Indian Summer takes it to a whole nother level just because the diversity of color that it has, and it also kind of has a little bit of a smaller leaf too. So it's a little bit different texture on it. And I like that about it, more of kind of a rounded, smaller size leaf when you compare it to other japonicums. So I think it really sets itself apart, and it deserves a place on my list. I know at 25, I'm like, man, how could I list that at 25? But I think, as we go along here, you'll see why.
All right, we're coming up at number 24. Bryan, what do you have at number 24?
Okay, so 24, we got Acer palmatum Dragon Tears. Now, for me, Dragon Tears is kind of like that hope of the holy grail, right? Of the weeping red Japanese maple with the palmate leaf. So, and it's about as close as you can get to that. And that's what I love the idea of it. And I had a couple of good sized ones back in Oklahoma. And unfortunately, I had to leave those behind. But at that time, they were just starting to get that nice arching kind of semi-pendulous habit to them. And it really just captured my mind of the idea and the concept of a weeping red palmate. Like it just really, sets the bar high. It doesn't quite, it's not like Ryusin, it doesn't have that extreme weeping habit to it, but it's close, it's about as close as we got right now. Maybe in the future, we'll find something that tops that. But I think Dragon Tears is just right there in that vein.
Yeah, Dragon Tears is such a cool plant. It was found as a plagiotropic branch that was coming off the side of a seedling from Bloodgood in Tennessee by our friend Ray Jackson, the same guy who introduced Hearts of Fire and Rising Sun. Many of y'all may have those red buds. And he found this just unusual growth that was just growing outwards and kind of weeping. And so he grafted it and started producing it. And it does have this kind of funky shape to it. The plagiotropic basically means it has a hormone imbalance.
Right.
And grows a little more laterally. And that's exactly what this tree does. It gets a lot of lateral growth to it. And I've seen some gorgeous trees. We were down in Texas at a Texas meetup, and we've got a video of Cindy Bowles' garden, and you can see a larger Dragon Tears that's been staked up and just allowed to spread out and sort of cascade weep kind of slightly downward. Yeah. And it's such an interesting shaped tree for a tree that has a Bloodgood style foliage.
Right. I think that's the key with that. I think you hit it there. I think with Dragon Tears, it's one you want to stake up, and then you don't really want to prune too much on it because you want those branches to just keep reaching out, because as they reach out and get farther out, then that's when they begin to hang and just kind of give you that weeping feel to it. You want those long, lengthy branches on it to give you that feel. That's what I love about Dragon Tears. I definitely had to have that on my list.
All right, coming in at number 23, what do you have, Bryan?
Okay, 23. This is probably controversial right here. Like, I'm going to drop it at 23. It was really hard to put this one. This is a classic. Probably one of most collectors' favorite tree. I mean, honestly, when it comes to Japanese maples, we have Acer palmatum, maawa yatsubusa.
At number 23.
23, right?
What are the other 22 Japanese maples that coming in? Maawa yatsubusa coming in at 23. Oh my goodness.
It's crazy. You know, me and Sean were joking around. He was like, dude, you didn't even have a maawa yatsubusa until recently. I'm like, I know, it's crazy. You know, I get so caught up in the hype of all the other newer varieties. You know, sometimes the classics kind of get left behind a little bit, but I could not make a list without having this, because this is the doorway for everything else. You know, like everything comes through the maawa. All the seedlings that come from maawa yatsubusa are amazing, but there's nothing better than that classic. You know, it's one of those things where it has the most unique shape. and just that crazy leaf pattern and tightly layered compact habit. It's awesome.
Nothing better but 22 other Japanese maples.
Except for the other 22.
Guys, Makawi Yatabusa, it's a classic. It's a tight, dense, compact dwarf. Looks like a little bonsai tree out there. Looks lively. Looks like a creature. To me, I love Makawa because of that layering habit. And it's hardy. It's easy to grow. I was shooting a top 5 with Jules, who's our intern from the University of Maine, just recently. And I'm going to throw one out there. Makawi Yatabusa is in her top 5.
Yeah.
And it is such a tree that when people see, they fall in love with.
For sure.
Especially if you've never seen anything like a Makawa.
Yeah.
Because the Makawi Yatabusa started the Makawi Yatabusa family collection. And, all these other trees that we've introduced or that other people have introduced are progeny from Makawi Yatabusa. And the reason people were looking through these seedlings is because of that tightly layering habit and how easy this tree is to grow, and the fact that it's so dense and compact and dwarf in nature means it's a tree that many people can grow. It's easy to grow, and it's going to be pretty beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's what really makes something special about it is that I think it has a place in every landscape. I think in most growing climates too, it can handle the heat, it can handle the cold. It's a very versatile plant, very easy to grow, and just create some of the most unique shapes and just textures out in the garden. I love that. I had to have it on my list. I know it's low on that list, but it had to be on the list. So there we go.
Hey, I'm glad it made your top 25, even if it's coming in number 23. Coming in number 22, what do you have, Bryan?
All right, 22, I had to come in with some color, some strong color, and I know this is Tim's favorite color also. I had to bring the yellow. We got Acer Palmatum Summer Gold.
Summer Gold all the way down at 22?
I mean, I'm telling you.
Man, these are controversial to me.
It is very controversial. I was like, man, how do I put this list together? Very difficult to do because there's so many cultivars that I love. And but Summer Gold is, in my opinion, the best yellow, except for the one I have ahead of it. But for me, like maples is a hard thing because you talk about a maple, I say, yeah, that's one of my favorites. So they're all one of my favorites. So it's really, really hard to narrow this down. But Summer Gold is proven to me, like it's proven itself. It's a great cultivar, very heat tolerant, one that I grew in Oklahoma, so I have a lot of experience with it. Always just created such a kind of luminescent, bright spot in my garden. Always drew my eye to it. And I think in landscaping, that's what you want. You want things that grab your attention. You want things that play up with other things in your garden. And Summer Gold does that for sure.
Yeah, y'all know I always talk about Summer Gold because every time I'm talking about every other tree, I say, pair this with a Summer Gold.
Yeah.
Pair this with a Summer Gold. If you've seen our videos on YouTube, you know that's so true. And yellow brings out so many other colors in the landscape. The thing I like about Summer Gold is it's one of the more heat tolerant yellows. So if you put this out there in the sunlight, you've got a Japanese maple that's going to thrive. It may show a little bit of burn when it first gets established, but once it's established, it can handle more sun than almost any of the other yellows. And it's a selection by Fratelli Ghirardelli Nursery, who introduced Fireglow and introduced Stella Rosa. They introduced so many awesome plants into the nursery trade. And Summer Gold is one of my favorites from them. I mean, it's a classic.
It definitely holds its own for sure. I've got several other yellows in my garden, and all of them are in full sun. I've got a Jordan, I've got a Sunny, and I've got Summer Gold. And the Summer Gold outperforms all of those. So, I mean, it really holds that color well. And so because of that, I had to put that on my list for sure.
Now, Summer Gold is a hybrid Palmatum x Shirasamanum. Many people don't realize that Summer Gold and Jordan are sister seedlings.
Yeah.
From everything that we've been told. And Summer Gold looked a little more Palmatum, and Jordan looked a little more Shirasamanum on the older growth, and that's how they distinguish them. The Sunny you mentioned is a seedling from Jordan, so it is also a hybrid as well. So, I mean, there's so many cool things about it, but Summer Gold, it's hard to beat it.
It's hard to beat it. That's why it's on my list for sure. So we moving right along here. Let's do it. All right, we'll jump right here to number 21. This is kind of like I don't know. This tree is insane. I think it's one of the best spring colors out there. We got Acer palmatum Mila.
Man, I would say that's one of the best summer colors too.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, in the summer, it keeps putting on that new growth. I mean, the spring color's unreal though.
Yeah, I mean, you get some tones on this. I know me and you and Matt joke around all the time, like, what color is this really? It's like pink, it's orange, it's red, it's got this yellow kind of vein to eye to it. I mean, it really is something unique. I think, you know, as a collector, I'm always looking for something that really stands out, really sets itself apart. I think Mila fits that bill for me, and it's why it made my list, was because the color is almost indescribable most of the time. And like you said, even whenever it starts to finish the spring, it comes with the new growth over top of that, and you're just constantly drawn to that plant. You're like, man, this thing is just performing. I love the one that you have over at your mom and dad's garden. It's got kind of a narrow shape to it, really nice kind of pillar shape to it. And when it's lit up in spring color, dude, it's insane, man. I love it.
Yeah, Mila is a selection by Dick Vandermatt. And Dick Vandermatt recently passed away. We did a whole podcast about Dick Vandermatt and his introductions. And he's introduced some just rock stars to the trade. Mila is one of my favorites from his introductions, and one of my favorite Japanese maples overall myself.
Yeah.
I mean, the colors on it are crazy. The colors are just unreal shades of almost like metallic-y, orange, red, peach.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe
really
everything because your eyes see how beautiful it is, but it's just such a conglomeration of unique shades of color that it just draws you to it. And this tree is one of those trees that Matt and I were one of the first people in the United States with. And the more we started growing this tree, it started shocking us how amazing it was. It's vigorous. This tree gets out there and grows fast. It's beautiful in the spring. The summer flush of growth during the summer is one of the most colorful in that red shades of color. And it can really get some nice shades of like orangey red in the fall. Again, it's one of those colors that's kind of like a rusty orange that's just unique and special all to Mila. Everything about it is a tree that when you stack it up versus the other, 1,1400 cultivars we have, it's one that stands alone.
For sure. It climbed into my top list very quickly. It's not one that I had grown before until I came out here. And so, I mean, that just shows you just how impressive it is to make my top 25, even though it's something that relatively new to me. I just think it's a top performer. I think everybody should have one of those in their garden for sure. And moving right along here, let's jump into an amazing cultivar. We got Hot Blonde.
Hot Blonde coming in at number 20.
Number 20, Hot Blonde.
This is getting controversial more and more to me.
I mean, I tell you what, I'm sitting here with the Mr. Maple brothers themselves, and I'm putting it at 20. But no, this made my list. It had to be on the list. I mean, if I'm going to make a list, it has to be on there. I mean, Hot Blonde, I think, when it comes to just the Heat Seeker series, the whole concept of it, I think is just such a great new kind of frontier to explore with Japanese maples, and to have that option to grow something in high heat areas, like down in Texas, with a bright yellow color. I mean, it's just crazy. And honestly, I think too, its fall color is probably one of the most underrated. I think I put it in that same category with like Osakazuki. Like, its fall color is phenomenal, man. It's an electric pink color that it will just blow your mind. I love that about Hot Blonde. Yeah,
Hot Blonde is part of our Heat Seeker series, and it is an Acer oliveranum X. And we actually believe it to be X Shirasawanum, and more importantly, Acer X Shirasawanum aureum. It leaves out later than many other Japanese maples, especially Acer oliveranum. Very similar to what Acer Shirasawanum does. That allows it to avoid those late frosts that many people get in the early spring. But this tree is bragged up all throughout Texas and the heat of the South because it takes off, it grows vigorously, and it can handle high heat areas, full sun, yellow, better than any other tree that I think we grow. I've seen it in full sun near the Battery of Charleston. I've seen it in full sun in Bishopville, South Carolina. I've seen people tell me that it's growing in full sun in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it's vigorous. It grows very fast.
Yeah.
It's bright yellow as the summer goes on. And the coral pink colors that it gets on top of the new growth,
really, really nice.
It's really nice.
I mean, this cultivar is so impressive. You get some nice borders too, and in the spring when it's leafing out, you get some nice kind of pink to red borders on that. And I love the leaf shape too. It's kind of got this. It almost kind of gives you like this like trident vibe, because it's got like the 3 longer, more prominent lobes to it. So it has a different texture than your standard palmatum, and so I love that about it. It brings so many different interesting characteristics when it comes to maples, and that's what I'm always looking for, something that kind of sets itself apart and puts on a show. The spring, the summer new flush, and that fall color on Hot Blonde. I mean, it had to make my list. I know it's in 20. It's like, how do you put it at 20? But it's like it had to be on the list. This is a list of my favorites for sure. I mean, and Hot Blonde is on that list. So
now, Acer oliveranum is in section palmatum, so it's really closely related to Acer palmatum. Most of the time when we graft it to Acer palmatum, so they're grafted onto the root systems that many other Japanese maples have. So it's got that shallow, non-invasive root system, but the tree just takes off. And It is such a beautiful tree. Just last week, Matt was like, what's someone doing? And someone was driving down and paused and parked right in front of his driveway and stopped and took a photo of his Hot Blonde in his driveway. I was like, Matt, they're probably taking a photo of the Hot Blonde. He's like, really? And then not long after that, we got an email talking about how a customer just did a pickup and they went around and took photos of a few things around the area.
Oh, for sure.
I was like, there it is.
I think that's one, if people see it the more people see it, the more it's going to become just a staple, I think, as far as just how heat tolerant it is, its vigorous growth and colors, got to be on the list, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, for me, it's such an amazing plant. I don't know how we were blessed to find this so early in our career. I mean, this is a tree that, for me, it's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah.
As introducing something better than this down the road.
For sure. I mean, this is like the flagship tree for Mr. Maple. I think I've always felt that way about it. I've always held it in that high esteem because it just sets the bar so high. I mean, it's like you're always trying to top the next cultivar, but man, Hot Blonde, how do you top that, right? It's just going to be, maybe we don't need to top it. It's right there where it should be. It's on the list. It's probably going to be on everybody's favorite list. It's going to be a tree, I think, that just continues to gain popularity, and for good reason. I
mean, you've got Emperor One and Bloodgood, which are the classic red uprights that have become a staple. And I really see Hot Blonde as being the yellow upright that becomes a staple for people because it's a production plant. It's beautiful, and it keeps showing off all throughout the year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so we'll jump on here to another really cool Japanese maple here. This is one that I've only recently learned about when I came out here, and it's because Matt and Tim have been hyping this tree, and believe me, it has lived up to the hype. We got Acer palmatum, Naniwa Benny.
Yeah, Naniwa Benny. We hadn't really made it that much available yet.
I know.
And we've got it in production, so it's coming on the way.
Yeah.
But we've been really trying to get a good set of these available. And, one thing after another, it's just I think a couple years it got skipped in production.
Right.
We couldn't find the stock plants. And then we really started producing it. Matt, this is one that he is really heavy on.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really amazing tree.
Yeah, I think so too. Whenever I first discovered this out in the greenhouses, early on, it was like, when I was here, it was like, hey, man, let's go out and try to get pictures of a lot of the trees that maybe we don't have a website for or list for. And so I was really digging, deep into the greenhouses, trying to find cool stuff that I'd never heard of. And I saw this and getting pictures. I'm like immediately calling Matt, like, what in the world is this? And immediately he's like, dude, this tree is absolutely amazing. But I put this kind of in that same realm, like with Mila a little bit. It has some really crazy colors to it. It has kind of this yellowish kind of eye to the leaf as well. Really small leaf too. I like that about it. Nice little small leaf on it. And what I immediately, whenever I saw this, I wanted to have one. So I got one from you guys. I planted one in full sun, and then I got a second and I planted it in shade. And so, if I got two of something, it's definitely got to be on my list. And but man, the color variation between it being in shade or in sun is really cool. You get so many different color variations on that. That's why it made my list.
I think you do that a lot with a lot of cool plants. You take a tree, you put it in the sun, you take a tree, you put it in the shade, or you put it in a container and move it around. Right. And it's cool to see the different variations in color that you can get from shade versus sun on the exact same cultivar.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
These are clones, essentially. The tops are clones that are the exact same cultivar, but yet you can get such different colors between the shade and the sun.
Yeah, I like experimenting with that, and I think it's really cool in the landscape, because sometimes when you're trying to describe a tree, and especially like with Naniwa Benny, I mean, the colors on it are insane. But if you were just talking about it in full sun, you'd be talking about these kind of like pink oranges and more of the yellow eye to it, and then you get it in shade and you're getting like these kind of bronzes with that kind of a yellowish eye to it. So like it brings a whole nother level to the plant. And that's what I love about landscaping with Japanese maples, is because you can play off of those colors and textures. And I like Naniwa Benny for so many reasons, but I think that small leaf with a really vibrant spring color, to me, is like what sets it apart.
Yeah, I think that you take the color that Naniwa Benny is, that pink, orange, red you're talking about in the spring, and it really looks like you took a regular Japanese maple, and if you've ever like played on your phone and saw how you can like adjust color contrast,
right?
It's like you increase the color contrast in real life,
right?
Because it is dynamic contrast with everything else in the garden and on itself.
Yeah, well, I keep the hype going on this. I'm always talking it up to all the other collectors, like Michael James, and like I'm always like, dude, you gotta have an Naniwa Benny, so I think as a collector, it's definitely one that we're all kind of seeking after, and I think I'm excited to hear that you guys have got this going, because I think more people see this. The spring interest maples, I think there's a huge list to it. So you're always looking for something that sets itself apart a little bit. I think Naniwa Benny does that.
So coming number 18, what do you have, Bryan?
All right. So number 18, this is my first on the list so far of a lace leaf. We've got Yalo Orange.
Yeah, Yalo Orange, also known as Yalo Orange, selection by Yalo Nursery. I always thought it was actually the one in Germany, because that's what a lot of the books say.
Right.
But I was recently told this was actually a selection that was introduced here in the United States by the United States nursery that's, family connected.
Right. Okay. Yeah, this thing has some really great colors to it. This is kind of reminiscent of it's got like a pink red, really nice pink red with a yellow kind of veined eye to that leaf also. And what's interesting, I think texture wise, really sets it apart for me with this one, is like it's a lace leaf, but it's not super lacy. You know what I mean? It's got longer lobes and it's got serrated edges down those lobes, but it doesn't just get into this big ruffled lace leaf. It kind of keeps that a sleek, kind of narrow lobe with a lot of serration on it. So it just has a different texture, I think. And when you're looking at all the lace leaves, you're looking for something that sets itself apart. I know I say that a lot, but as a collector, that's what I'm always looking for. I think this one here is definitely, holds its own when it comes to all the other lace leaves for sure.
Yeah, I think the colors are dynamically different than your typical red or your typical green.
Right.
When it has that sort of green eye, as you described it, on the lace leaf itself, it draws you in. It's got a unique shape in the fact that it stays short and it gets some nice width to it. And the orange of the fall color is one of the better orange fall colors of any of the Japanese maples. It's a tree that I fell in love with as a weeping lace leaf. It's dynamically different than what you typically think of a typical red Japanese maple. And
I think that kind of like that orange kind of hue that it can get in that fall color, I think this also, I caught some pictures online, if you ever get a chance to look at this on MrMaple.com, where I've got the sun shining through that leaf, and it really just kind of illuminates and just, really highlights the amount of color that's on that leaf that's just packed into that smaller lace leaf style leaf. And I think, it really does create a splash. And like you said, it's a low growing, mounding, weeping, cascading lace leaf. So it's always going to have a spot in the garden. It's not going to get too big for most spaces. So I like that about it. And, definitely one I had to put on my list. I know it's kind of one that not a lot of people talk about, I don't think, when it comes to lace leaves, but I think it deserves a spot on my list.
That's a pretty good one. It's hard to beat that for me as a unique lace leaf.
Yeah.
And so that one's pretty awesome. What do you have coming at number 17, Bryan?
All right, so this might be controversial too. This is Acer japonicum Meikujaku, the dancing peacock. I absolutely love Acer japonicums, and this is, to me, when it comes to just what I think of first in my mind of a Acer japonicum, I think of Meikujaku. So I mean, it had to be on my list. It's just, that leaf is amazing. The way it's got those deeply divided lobes, that serrated edges to it, it definitely does remind you of that peacock feather, especially when it's in just premium fall color with oranges and reds and purples. I mean, it's absolutely amazing.
Acer japonicum Meikujaku was one of the first Japanese maples of a full moon that we started growing here at Mr. Maple, and it's one that we just fell in love with. A lot of people originally started calling this tree Meiku space Jaku, and it didn't make a lot of sense because Mei means dancing, Kujaku means peacock.
Right.
So the space was kind of the wrong place. So we started fixing that. And then also, this tree is also known as Aconitifolium, also known as fernleaf maple.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of different names, but it's still the classic dancing peacock Japanese maple that is just outstanding. The red blooms in the early spring are larger than your typical Japanese maple blooms, and they contrast so well against the large leaves that is almost like an additional characteristic. I mean, you think about a blooming Japanese maple, this one's blooms are pretty prominent on a mature specimen. It grabs your attention, and then those large leaves look almost tropical during the spring, the summer, and then when fall hits, it's so crazy some of the things you learn from shooting a lot of these videos. Like what we learned with Augustin Coelho Vera is that many of the japonicums go to senescence or fall color based on the length of the day. So as the day starts shrinking in the fall, it triggers the fall color to start taking effect in many of the japonicums, meaning trees like Meikujaku are going to be very consistent in their fall color regardless of the weather.
Right. Yeah. And the other part I think that plays into that factor is, that the size of that leaf, and it's a nice kind of thick leaf as well. So it handles through the summers well. So by the time you do get to that fall, you've still got a nice leaf that's not too tattered and torn from the hot summers. And so it gives you a perfect canvas for fall color. And, japonicums are known for that. And I think just the ornate style of the leaf of Meikujaku is what really sets it apart, being, at just that feathery feel to it. And I love its structure too. A very nice, rigid structure to like that japonicum tree form. I love that rigid branches that it gets. It just has a kind of a regal appeal out in the garden and the landscape, and definitely had to be on my list.
So I'm looking at your list here, and you got another big leaf tree at number 16.
That's right. That's right. Now, this one you and Matt put on my radar, and I'm always appreciative of that. That's what I love about Mr. Maple, is because you guys are always trying to bring new and exciting plants to our landscapes. And as a collector, that's what I do. I get these plants and I put them in my landscape, and that's what I love. I love to see how they contrast, see how they grow. But we've got Acer sabodianum yayoi gasa.
That is one of the coolest Acer sabodianums to me. And oddly enough, it's not the highest sabodianum on your list, because I'm looking up your other stuff on your list. I'm like, man, how do you beat yayoi gasa?
Right?
I mean, this is a tree that Matt and I, we did a reintroduction program with the National Arboretum. And we contacted them and said, what do you have in your collection that needs to be back into the trade? And so we got their full list. And this, I mean, it looks almost like a Saboldianum hybrid. Like it looks like it could easily be a Saboldianum X japonicum or something like that.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, it does give you those japonicum vibes to it.
It has one of the biggest leaves, but this tree was wild collected along the coast of Japan by a Dr. Creech that worked at the National Arboretum. Not the same Dr. Creech at Stephen F. Austin University. This predates Dr. Creech at SFA. But this is Dr. Creech of the National Arboretum was wild collecting and found Yayo. And then I guess they notated it was neat enough to actually put a cultivar name on it.
Right.
And I mean, it's a tree that I fell in love with, and just seeing that there's not another Saboldianum out there like it.
Yeah, I love when you get into the Saboldianum cultivars. I love just the spring pubescence, those really, really fine hairs. When this thing's first leafing out, it just kind of has this like silver, misty silver look to it because there's so many hairs on that leaf, so prominent. And what is really interesting about this cultivar that caught my attention right away was that it kind of has some spring color too, not just a plain green color. It has some nice blushing with some pinks and oranges when that thing is first leafing out. And then with all that pubescence on top of that, you're like, man, this thing looks wild. It just doesn't look real. And then as that leaf unfurls, you get that nice big size leaf to it. Kind of reminiscent of that japonicum feel. So I think, when I think about cultivars, I'm always thinking about, how can we take things to the next level? And I think Yayo brings it, man. It's awesome.
So number 15, this one could be controversial too to some people. What do you have at number 15?
All right. So with number 15, I gotta bring this into the conversation because nobody does it any better than the Mr. Maple Bros. And I know when you guys think about cultivars and when you introduce things into the trade, I know you've gone through the process. I know you make sure that this is going to be one that everybody just is got to have in their collections. We got Acer palmatum Red Panda.
Now, this isn't even your highest introduction by Mr. Maple.
It's not.
So that's crazy in itself. Red Panda was a chance seedling that Matt and I found. It's got that maawa yatsubusa-like growth, but after evaluating it against so many other red Japanese maple seedlings that had that maawa-like growth, this one kept the red the best for us, and then had some of the best red new growth, and had some of the deepest, like pure red colors of any of those maawa seedlings.
Yeah, whenever you guys started telling me about this, it was just a really exciting concept. I kind of use this term a lot, but it's like, you get into these like holy grail type maples where you're looking for this to break into this new realm, right? And a red maawa, is just like everybody wants a red maawa. And I think, there's so many varieties of maawa variances out there now, but I think Red Panda, man, like you guys hooked me up with this tree early on, and I immediately put it in the ground. I was like, I want to see what this thing can do. I put this in full sun in my garden here in Western North Carolina, and I've had it in the ground now for 2 years. So like I'm excited about that because it's like, man, and dude, I'm telling you guys, this thing puts on some crazy, crazy colors. The more sun you give it, the better colors it gets. And as you get that just bright red spring color, going to kind of a bronze when you get into those summer months, but then that new red growth popping over top of that is absolutely crazy. Right now, I have probably, 10 variances of maawas in my garden. And when I go out and I look at all of them, Red Panda is right there. I mean, bringing the show every day. I love it, man. It's such a great cultivar.
So Matt and I just recently went to Buckholz Nursery with Mom and Dad, and we got to go check through all the maawa seedlings again. And there were tons of variations to start looking through.
Yeah.
And we actually filmed a new interesting plants coming at Buckholz Nursery walkthrough that we did a voiceover on. And there's a yellow maawa seedling.
Nice.
A yellow.
Nice.
That's just like bright yellow right now in the summer.
In the greenhouse.
And yes. I was just like, That one's getting potted up.
Yeah, that one's good potted up. But
Don't have a name on it yet. But
I mean, Red Panda, I think, it's such a great name too, and just for a great plant. The Maawa Yatsubusa is known for its crazy structure, that amazing leaf, kind of layered leaf, that crazy dwarf habit. So having this red colored Maawa variant is just, it really captures my mind when it comes to collecting plants, because I want that in my collection. I want that in my garden. I have this planted next to a couple of cool trees. I'll just talk about that pairing just because I love just how things complement each other. But I've got this planted next to an algaton, and I've got it planted next to a sunny. So I've got like these great color contrasts, and I think Red Panda just, bam, it just hits you with that red color. And right now it's kind of this like bronze golden color with the red pops all over it. It just looks great, man. And every time I go out in my garden, I get excited about it. So it had to make my list.
All right, Bryan, what do you have better than Red Panda at number 14?
Yeah, how do you top that, right? All right, so moving on here to number 14, we got Acer palmatum Koto Maru. Now, Koto Maru for me is relatively new in my collecting, but it's one that I think's been around for a little while. But I think it's kind of not at popularity as like your typical dwarfs. And with my smaller garden, I've been really getting into more of those dwarf varieties because I'm trying to have as many plants as I possibly can. But I need some dwarfs in there to kind of give me some spacing between some of my larger uprights. But Koto Maru, I think for me, what captured me on that cultivar was it has that like kind of bubbly feel to it. The middle low being rounded, it gives it this like weird like bubbly feel to it, and it's like accentuated more too than like a lot of the other dwarf varieties. And very small leaf, and that middle lobe is kind of like it's fatter than the others and very rounded, so it stands out even more. And it's got some nice border in the spring, some nice kind of reds and pinks in the border on the spring color on that. So again, it just really drawed me in. I'm like, man, this cultivar sets itself apart.
When I see Koto Maru out in the landscape, when I see it in a garden, it's typically tight and dense. It makes almost a uniform ball shape almost every time. Mm-hmm. And if you think of something like Tiny Tim and Kunara Pygmy, those are so different. I mean, this is the smallest, one of the smaller witch's brooms that's in the nursery trade.
Right.
I mean, it stays tight, dense, compact, really good uniform shape. Fits in a lot of people's gardens because of that smaller shape. But it does have that sort of bubbly appearance, especially when you see this tree in the spring with some of that border to it.
Yeah.
It draws you in.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's a heavily underrated cultivar, and it's cool to see it coming in at number 14.
Yeah, one of those I think a lot of people aren't talking about. Hopefully, I can bring more attention to it. If you haven't heard of that one, go check it out. I've got some great pictures I captured in the greenhouses here of Koto Maru, and it's just really has a unique texture to it. And I've got one growing in my garden. I love it, man. Every time I go out there, I go and check it out because it's always putting on some new growth. Right now in summer, looks really nice. And that dwarf habit, again, like I think, when we're all working kind of in smaller spaces these days, smaller gardens, and having a dwarf that really sets itself apart, you got to go with the Koto Maru. All right, so moving right on down the list here, I've got a killer Japanese maple coming your way here at number 13. This was hard. I wanted to put this higher, but there's so many amazing trees. But I've got Acer Shirasawa Magic Moon.
Magic Moon. That's another one from the Area 51 collection here at Mr. Maple.
Oh, man, this tree got me so excited. I remember back in the day when you guys first started doing your limited sales back in the day. I'm just this collector at my computer in Oklahoma, and I'm watching these things come
Fastest
up.
fingers in the West.
Yeah, watching these things pop up every hour, and I'm pulling over at work to check my phone, so I could make sure I get, and Magic Moon pops up, the craziest thing I've ever seen. I'm like, I got to have one of these. Came in a good size too at the time. I think it was like a 5-gallon, something like that. And so, it was a good size tree, and being a Shirasawa variegated with not only just variegation, but a unique style of variegation, I think just really elevates this cultivar to a special place in my heart when it comes to Japanese maples, because it just does things that no other shiro does, right? It's in its own category, especially when you're thinking about variegation and what you think of a traditional scents and variegations. Magic Moon kind of breaks all the rules and brings this like interesting splotching, swirling style of variegation to it that's really, really hard to describe.
It really is a rock star plant. You mentioned the limited release and how, you were always the quickest fingers in the West. It was really crazy. We went and did a tour of Texas, and we had a dinner meetup. And when the hour hit, a lot of people's phones started buzzing, and they pulled up Mr. Maple to see what was the tree that we dropped on the hour, since they knew our limited release. And I was like, oh my goodness. This was the first time I'd been around a large crowd of people, and all their phones had alarms for on the hour, every hour to check the limited release.
I'm telling you, guys are the best at setting the hook when it comes to your marketing here at Mr. Maple. But, Magic Moon, I mean, this thing is crazy. I love the pictures I've been able to get of this. It's a photographer's dream plant because it's so crazy, that variegation. And one of my favorite pictures that I ever got of this was here at the farm, and I was down just like sweating out in the greenhouse. Had my camera. It's like it's 100 degrees in the greenhouse, and I find this old stock plant of Magic Moon, and it's got this little balled up, looks like a fist, variegated, these like yellow stripes on the leaf, and it looks like it's just reaching out to give me a fist bump as I'm out there sweating getting pictures of Japanese maples. So it took me to a whole nother level. Magic Moon is absolutely a phenomenal cultivar, guys. I'm telling you, you're going to love this tree. You got to get one in your landscape.
I love it because there's not many variegated shiro types, and when they aren't very stable. And for that unique style of variegation, there aren't many other trees that have that style of variegation. And so it stands alone in many categories. And that's how we kind of like to look at trees is we've got 1,500 cultivars. Do we need another red?
Right. Yeah.
Do we really need another red upright that looks like, many of the other red uprights that are out there?
Sure. Yep.
We need something that's different. We need something that draws people in a unique way. And Magic Moon was one of those trees that, once we found it, we were like, this is amazing. It was actually a seedling that Jonathan Savlich gave us, and we introduced here at Mr. Maple. So it was just a seedling. He didn't have a name on it. And the same guy who introduced Lillian's Jewel gave us the seedling of Acer Shiro and Magic Moon.
I mean, the odds of finding that, and especially with Shiro, because you don't see a lot of that variances like that with variegation, especially that really odd style of variegation to it. That full moon leaf with these like yellowish striping and swirling on it. It's absolutely amazing. I love that about that cultivar, which is a perfect segue to the next one here. I had to get a Pictum on the list, right? You can't have a top 25 without an Acer Pictum. We got Acer Pictum Usagumo.
Oh man, you brought in the batwing maples.
Sheesh.
This list would be hard. I'm looking at this list and I'm like, it would be hard for me to compile a list.
It was hard, man. Whenever I said I was going to do 25, I'm like, I got this 25. I can make a 25 list. And then I start putting, pencil to paper. I'm like, this is way hard. Like there's so many I want to put on here. I can't put them all. I can only put 25. But Usagumo, it's a wild tree. This thing, the batwing style leaf is just phenomenal. I think it just brings such an interesting leaf shape and texture to the garden. This thing has some crazy colors. It can be like this pale kind of pink white color, like when it first leaves out. I have some pictures that are just
like salmon pink to bronze when it first comes out. Yeah.
And you're like, is that even real? Like that does not look like a real plant. It kind of has this like shine to it too. So it just looks like a fake plant, but it's not. It's the real deal. Usagumo, man, I've got this one planted out in my garden. I've got it next to a dwarf called Emily, which I really like. It's got a really small, tiny shiny leaf to it. And then you got the Usuma, the big bat wing style leaf over there. Just a great contrast, and it's always putting on a show. Right now it's putting on some summer growth. It's kind of this weird kind of yellow and green color coming over top of it. Looks really nice.
I know Matt and I, when we purchased Highland Creek Nursery around 2013, 2014, that's when we actually really started getting more into the Pictums and Usugumo. He had been producing Usugumo, and we had some of his stock plants. We put one in the ground at my parents' home, and man, that thing has grown and turned into a beautiful tree.
Yes.
It's every bit of 12 to 14 feet now, and in the springtime, it steals the show with its just, that pink color, then going to the white. I mean, it's the batwing maples just have that large batwing style leaf. And then when you add color on top of that, of the white that's just dusting, that's sort of, it's almost dusting, it's almost reticulated.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it steals the show in the spring.
For sure.
And there's a lot of other trees on that side of the garden.
Yeah, and that's what, I hope that's what I'm sharing here with my list. And this is what I tried to do, because it took me some time to put this list together, but I wanted to showcase just the amazing diversity that you can find in Japanese maples. And I think Usugumo, just with all of those characteristics, that amazing spring color, that swirling kind of just like reticulated sand dusting, and you get in the summer months, and then that new growth over top, fairly heat tolerant too. You can put this out in full sun. So you think about those crazy colors and you're thinking, man, I got to protect this. No, you can put this out in full sun, grows very well. It really does have a place on the list.
All right, Brian, coming to number 11, what do you have?
All right. So, when it comes to maawa variances, there's so many, and it's hard to narrow it down. I had Maawa Yatsubusa, the classic, on here. We talked about Red Panda, had to have it on there, one of the new best reds out there. I had to go with a Talon Buckholz introduction, because Japanese Princess, Acer palmatum Japanese Princess, I think is just, in my opinion, of the Maawa variances, like it really just captivates me, because it has this crazy kind of larger size leaf that kind of twists and ruffles just a little bit. Some really nice kind of pinks to yellows in the spring. Like, I've seen it kind of vary a little bit on that, depending on your sun and shade ratio on that. So like, those colors you get in the spring on Japanese Princess are some of the best, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the most pink of any of the Maawa variations. One of the things I like about it too is it's not just the color that differentiates this from many other cultivars. The leaf texture itself has more of a twisting and curled leaf to it, which to itself is almost its own distinguishing characteristic.
Absolutely.
Even if it didn't have that pink spring color.
If it was just green and it had that leaf, that kind of twirled and kind of ruffled leaf to it, the way it just kind of swoops back and forth, I really like the texture of it. I think that's kind of what draws me in. And then the spring color, that pink color, man, it's hard to beat that. And great, obviously with that Maawa characteristic, great shape, just that tight, compact, layered habit to it. It looks amazing in my landscape right now. I've got it planted out with a bunch of other Maawa variances out there. So it had to make my list. I think, when I think of a lot of Talon's introductions too, I think his Japanese Princess is one of his best, man. I think it's up there.
When Matt and I did our top 50 Talon Buckholz introductions, it went towards the top of the list.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, we kept off Talon's favorite, which one of his favorites was fairy hair.
Right.
And so we got a lot of flack because Talon actually, while he introduced Japanese Princess, it's not one of his favorites.
Right. Yeah.
As it got older and they started seeing older specimens, some of the older specimens started developing a pine bark to it.
Nice.
And Bryan Talon really was like, I don't know if I like that cultivar anymore. It's like, right. Because it developed a pine bark?
Right.
It's like, yeah. So he's been focusing more, and he really liked fairy hair a lot more. So he gave us a lot of flack because we didn't include fairy hair in our top 50 list of Talon Buckholz introductions.
Well, that's what's cool about doing these lists, because everybody is drawn to different things. And so, this is my list. These are things that I'm drawn to. These are things I look at whenever I'm looking at collecting Japanese maples. And so I'm always just looking for those interesting characteristics Japanese Princess, you got to have one in your collection, especially if you're the maawa variant fan. I mean, I think it's the top of that list. Japanese Princess for sure. All right, so you want to move on here to number 10?
We're breaking down to number 10.
Number 10.
We've already went through 25 all the way down to number 10. So y'all, right now we're starting Bryan Rule's top 10.
I guess
top 10 Japanese maples.
This starts the top 10 here. This is where it got really, really difficult, where I had to really bring, some diversity here and make sure that I stayed true to what I am interested in as a collector. We've got at number 10, Acer japonicum, Abies Weeping.
Abies Weeping, that's a really good one. That's a heavily dissected and one of the more cascading, smaller growing Acer japonicums.
Yeah, that's what I really love about this cultivar. It stays a smaller size, which I really like that about it. And then, just the concept of Acer japonicum being a lace leaf really just, draws me in whenever I think about, just the textures. I love it's got a nice size leaf as well, just that perfectly almost like snowflake design, that it creates with that intricate cut leaf all throughout, all the dissected lobes, all the serrations in it. It makes you want to just look closer and closer and closer to it. And then with that kind of like rigid but cascading habit that it has, I think Abies Weeping definitely is. And here's another interesting story with this. When you guys were doing the limited sale, you had one pop up on there, and at the time I was like, I had made a call to Matt, and I was like, hey, can you hold this tree for me? I can't get to it today, and so he wound up holding it for me, and then I never got around to getting back with him. As crazy as that, like, I was a crazy collector. I don't know how that fell through the cracks, right? And then years and years later, I come out here to the farm.
You moved to North Carolina.
I moved to North Carolina to work for Mr. Maple, like a dream come true. And I'm walking through the greenhouses one day, and lo and behold, here is the 5-gallon Abies Weeping that I had seen a picture of and like laid claim to, all those years ago. So it was like it was meant to be. I had to be, come home with me.
Zero shipping.
Yeah, exactly. I saved so much on shipping on that, but no, it's such a great cultivar. I love dissected japonicums. The big giant leaf is amazing on japonicums, but having it in a lace leaf style is just really creates an interesting concept of texture and just what it brings to the landscape.
All right. Looks like your top 10 is going to be pretty full moon heavy.
It's going to be pretty full moon heavy here.
So what do you have coming in at number 9?
All right, number 9. This is a really cool tree. I'm excited to even talk about it. We've got Acer sabuldianum shario nosume.
The claw of the dragon.
The claw of the dragon. I always think of Skyrim when I think of this tree, but it's such an epic concept. And what really sets this apart is in the world of sabuldianums, you're always looking for that diversity, that something really unique. And this one has it. It's got a leaf style unlike any other sabuldianum out there, and really any other maple, really. And if you think about it, it's got a really interesting leaf. These really strong cut lobes that kind of have this claw-like look to it, and just creates an interesting texture in the garden.
And we did a Linear Lobum podcast the other day, and when I was looking at it, I was like, this is kind of like a Linear Lobum version of a sabuldianum.
I could see that.
It kind of is.
It
something like that.
It has that vibe for sure.
But sometimes the lobes will twist and curve and curl and look a little more like a dragon claw than any, Linear Lobum would. And to me, it just has a nice upright stature. It grows very dense, and it can get these shades of almost like blue-green kind of color to it, like a silver blue-green.
Yeah.
That's different than many other Japanese maples.
It definitely has a nice kind of a darker, like you said, like darker blue-green color to it. Really contrasts well with the other things around it. I actually have my Yalo Orange planted next to my Shario Usuma on one side, and then on the other side, I've got a hot blonde. So like it just creates all of these crazy colors and textures. That's what I'm all about. Like I could go on and on for hours about how amazing Japanese maples are when it comes to texture and color. And that's why Shario Usuma is on my list, because the texture on it is amazing. Great fall color too, gets you some nice oranges on that. So, you know, just playing off of those colors, you know, you've got the hot blonde with these electric pinks out front. You got some oranges in the back, you know, like I just love playing with those textures and colors. And Shario Usuma is no slack when it comes to that, because it's got it all going on.
You keep talking about all these different colors and pairings. How many cultivars do you have here in North Carolina now?
You know, I haven't made an official list in a while, but I'm probably getting close to about 150 different cultivars of Japanese maples. So
how many cultivars did you have when you were in Oklahoma?
At one time, I had 350 cultivars there in Oklahoma.
So your list, on top of working here at Mr. Maple, is pretty legit. You've got a lot of experience with these trees, and it's cool to see from your perspective,
right?
You know, what sort of falls into your top 25. Looks like we've got another sabodan coming here at number 8. What do you got, Bryan?
Yeah. So again, this is a cool one too, man. Like we have Acer sabodanum seki no kigan, right? So I mean, the concept of this tree is really cool, because in sabodanum, you know, typically you're going to be just seeing an upright green Japanese maple, right? Usually great fall colors on sabodanums, but usually you're thinking of just a typical upright. You get the weeping habit with a sabodanum. That's what really sets this thing apart. I love that shape that it can get. I remember whenever we went over to one of your friends' house, I saw a nice mature size of that for the first time. I was completely blown away. It was planted on the side of this hill, and it was the most amazing array of colors, purples and yellows and oranges and perfect fall color, perfect shape to cascade down the side of that heel. I was just like, man, this is what it's all about. You know, when you're thinking about cultivars, you know, seki no kigan being that weeping habit with a sabodanum, that's top notch.
I remember reading about this tree in a Maple Sighting newsletter, and they were like, this is a 100-year-old tree that was found in the wild, growing around Nikko National Park. It's named after a waterfall near Nikko National Park, Seki no Kigan. And I mean, this tree's got a lot of history behind it, not just how beautiful it is. I mean, this is a wild variation, a wild cultivar that was found growing, just people just walking out in the woods in Japan.
Right.
And this heavily cascading habit just breaks the mold, like you were talking about, of what you think of Acer sabodanum. And so it's one of the few weeping styles that have that true kind of Acer sabodanum, almost full moon-like leaf with that weeping habit. So it stands out and breaks the mold, but it's got that cool history behind it as well.
Right. That's awesome, man. I love hearing the history behind these cultivars, because I think that's what makes them special. I think that's what makes, you know, as a collector too, you love to hear that information, because then when you see the tree, you appreciate it for not just its beauty, but its history and the place that it had and how special it was that someone was like, we need to get that into cultivation. We need to get this in landscapes and gardens so that people can experience this amazing tree. And I took the inspiration from the one I saw at your friend's house, and I planted it on the little hillside that I have by my house, just because I was like, I want to replicate that and see that thing just cascading down the hillside of my side garden. So I love that cultivar. It had to be on my list. And we'll jump on here to number 7. I had to have a reticulated Japanese maple. I've had no reticulated Japanese maples up to this point. And this is a Talon Buchholz introduction. I think his very best when it comes to reticulated. We got Acer palmatum Amber Ghost.
So you think that Amber Ghost is your favorite of the Ghost series?
I think so. Yeah, for sure. Amber Ghost, definitely of the Ghost series. I think its color combination is just amazing. These kind of like pinkish, purplish, amber colors that it gets coming out in spring with those dark veins in it. It's really, really, it's hard to describe just what it does for me personally. It gets me excited because I know spring is there and I get to watch all these amazing trees leaf out. Amber Ghost is just like putting on a show. I keep coming back to it, getting pictures. I've got this planted in a nice little shady spot in my garden with a few other ghosts around it. But, Amber Ghost, man, it brings the heat every spring. I love this tree.
It's one of the most heat-tolerant selections from the Ghost series. It has a good, strong, upright stature, and it keeps giving you unique colors. In the early spring, you get some of those amber colors with strong reticulated variegation. By fall, you can get some bright orange reds that are some of the best fall colors of any of the Japanese maples. And to be that in a Ghost series, it's pretty spectacular. I mean, to me, Amber Ghost is up there for me. I probably have it as my number 2 on the Ghost series. Yeah. But Matt had it as his number 1. It's been one of Talon's many ghosts that have made number 1 on his list because it changes with him as well. But to me, it's an awesome plant. It's easy to grow. It's heat tolerant, and it's ever-changing beauty on a reticulated style Japanese maple.
For sure. And I think that's why it made my list, is that, whenever you're looking at all the there's a lot of them, and Talon has a lot of those introductions, and there's many of them that deserve to be on a list for sure. It was hard for me to go through them and say, I don't have room for Sister Ghost, or I don't have room for, Mikazuki, or what I mean? Like I wanted to put those on there, but I'm like, what has always been my favorite of that group, and it had to be Amber Ghost, just because that reticulation is so strong, and it's a great tree structure too. I love the way that grows. I've had experience with this in Oklahoma and growing it here, so I've seen it. It's tried and true. I've seen it perform well in my landscape, so I had to put that on my list.
So Amber Ghost came in at number 7. So obviously, we're going to go ahead and telling you that it's, your number 1 of the ghosts. Yeah. What would be your number 2 in the ghosts?
I'd probably have to go with Grandma Ghost.
Grandma Ghost. That's an interesting one.
It's kind of an interesting one for me. Grandma Ghost was one that I got in a good size back in Oklahoma. And I loved how it kind of had a larger leaf and just that like pure kind of white and green, it kind of reminded me of like Shigetatsu Sawa in that realm, you know what I mean? Just that pure white and green, it didn't really have a lot of color variances, but it just that tried and true. But that's what I liked about Grandma Ghost for sure.
All right, back on to Bryan Rule's top 25 list. Guys, coming in at number 6, what do you got, Bryan?
All right, number 6, Acer palmatum ornatum. A lace leaf making that high on my list definitely means that this tree is an outstanding cultivar. I remember when I was early on in my collecting days, I got an opportunity to visit quite a bit with Carl Munn, and became a good friend of mine, and we were always talking trees, and I was kind of early on, and he was seeing my passion about trees, and I'd be like, man, what's a cultivar I need to get my hands on, and I was always picking his brain, and he said, man, when it comes to lace leaves, he's like, I think ornatum is one of the best. So I had to get my hands on one, and I can see why. It has some of the best, like kind of this copper red color when it leaves out, and then the green bark on top of that contrast in color is absolutely insane. And some of the pictures that you see of the most beautiful, like ornate design of a lace leaf are usually of ornatum. You know what I mean? Like it creates that like classic structure that you can imagine when you think of a lace leaf.
You think about the Portland Japanese gardens, it's very likely an ornatum in that photo.
Right. I mean, and that's what people, think about when they think about those lace leaves, and just that structure and design that they create with that weeping, cascading habit. So ornatum was definitely high on my list. One that I grew in Oklahoma and one that I grow now. So it's a cultivar, I think, that is not used in the landscape as often anymore. There's so many lace leaves out there, so it's one that I think sets itself apart.
Yeah, ornatum. That thing really has some good colors. It's not your typical red. It's not your typical green. It's one of those things that just gives you some really nice shades of like a brick red color, orange red.
Yeah.
And the green stemming, the green interior part of the foliage, it really stands out with some good fall color. An awesome and a classic Japanese maple coming in at number 6. Acer palmatum, dissectum, ornatum.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting into this higher category here, I'm about to jump into number 5 here. These were like, I had to bring, some heavy hitters for me to put them in my top 5. This one right here, I think, is like a big thing for me. I always talk highly of this plant. We have Acer subuldianum, Kumoi nishiki.
Another full moon type maple.
Another full moon type.
But this one's variegated.
This right here, subuldianum, again, like, you're looking for that, something that breaks the mold, something that gets outside of what you typically think. The variegation on this is very unique too. Kind of the splotching style of variegation, kind of almost sand dusting in style, and very stable. I love that about it. Like, I've never seen this plant revert, always consistently variegated, and that full moon style leaf that you get with a subuldianum, I mean, it's really, really nice. And a big understated concept to this tree is its fall color. Dude, the pinks and reds, so the variegated parts go more pink, and then the darker parts go reds. It is absolutely insane. I love the fall colors on this tree, and the variegation that plays a big part in that. So I think that's what really helps this tree kind of go to the next level. I think without the variegation, I think it would be a beautiful tree, but I think just that slight different in color, especially in the fall, is absolutely amazing.
I know on mine and Matt's first trip to Japan, when we'd go visit nurseries, like the cool plant that they were like trying to brag about was Kumoi nishiki. Like, they'd bring it out and they'd be like, check this thing out. This thing's pretty awesome. And we're like, yeah, that is awesome. We have one at Mr. Maple, and their jaw would like dropped. Like, how'd you end up with such an awesome plant already?
Right.
But Kumoi nishiki is one of those next level plants. I mean, it's got some of that sand dusting in spots. Other spots has got that swirling.
Yeah.
And the variegation is strong and shows up very well on the full moon style leaf. It's got a good upright habit, very typical habit of Acer subuldianum, but the variegation is untypical of anything.
Yeah.
And it just stands out, and it's dynamically different on its variegation. And it's one of those trees that, you're a photographer. I know that you go out there and enjoy taking photos of Kumoi nishiki because each leaf is variegated in a different way.
For sure.
And that is something about some of the variegated plants that are just, an extra delight, is to be able to go out there and photograph the tree, because every photograph is slightly different.
Right. Yeah. It definitely plays a big part in what makes that plant unique, and what really draws you into it is that variegation throughout and being just slightly different on each leaf. I think it's something that, when it comes to variegated plants, I don't talk too much about variegated plants. Just because a lot of times there's like instabilities, there's inconsistencies, things like that. But I think, Kumoi nishiki does it so perfectly well. You know what I mean? That it's like, it just had to be high up on my list, because, and the other part about that is too, and with these subuldianums, you get that cold tolerance as well. So it grows in a lot more different climates, which I think it's better for when you think about, just that wider range of landscape design. And to have a Kumoi nishiki, I think, in your garden is something you got to have. All right. So, man, moving on up the list here, got number 4, Acer japonicum, Yamakagi.
The mountain shadows.
The mountain shadows, right? Acer japonicums are some of my favorite Japanese maples, and for good reason. But what I really love about Yamakagi is just that huge leaf on it, right? I mean, it's one of the biggest leaves of all the japonicums, and it just doesn't look like what you think of when you're thinking of Japanese maples. And I think in most landscapes, it would be something that somebody saw, they'd be like, what in the world is that? And it makes you stop and go, wow, I've never seen a leaf that big. And then you're like, well, it's a Japanese maple, like it just kind of breaks the rules and really gets into interesting texture too. You have these huge leaves, kind of gives it a tropical feel to it. Nice serrated edges on that as well. Just a great texture out in the garden. Really rigid structure too. I love the one that you have planted out in front of the office here. It really shows off that just like awesome rigid branching structure that it has. And those huge leaves just looked amazing.
Yeah, I remember my first encounter with the Yamakagi. I'd never even heard of the cultivar. It was our very first trip to Oregon. We got to go visit Don Schmidt Nursery. We got to go visit Eric Schmidt's dad's home. And as we pulled into the subdivision, I was just paying attention to where we were going, and it said Mountain Shadows. And I'd been studying J.D. Vertree's book quite a bit. And then when we went in and I saw this Acer japonicum with such large leaves, I put my hand next to it because I was like, I've got a large hand.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a large hand. Maybe not as big as yours, but larger than most. And I would put my hand next to the leaf and I would say, man, this thing is huge, huge. And then I looked down, and I studied Vertree's book and I saw it said Yamakagi, and I was like, Yama, mountain, Kagi, shadows.
Yeah.
And it just made, I was like, oh, this is named after their subdivision. And oddly enough, one of the neighbors there had found this as a chance seedling.
Wow.
And then it got introduced to the trade because a neighbor had found this as a chance seedling in Oregon, because there's Japanese maples everywhere in Oregon.
Right.
And Don Schmidt Nursery had introduced it. And to me, it's hard to beat Yamakagi for an Acer japonicum.
Right. I mean, when I was building my list and I got japonicums on here, I'm like, okay, I have to narrow it down. What is the most epic, in my opinion, Acer japonicum and Yamakagi. And I love that about japonicums. I always like to think about it's so mind-blowing that such a huge leaf can come out of that tiny little bud. You know what I mean? Like, it starts out with this tiny little bud, and a huge, like bigger than your hand leaf comes out of it. It's absolutely amazing. That texture is unlike any other Japanese maple out there. That's what really sets itself apart with japonicums. So Yamakagi had to make that list.
All right, we're dropping into your number 3. And honestly, I actually, I didn't realize this was your number 3. I thought this might have been your number 2. What do you have at number 3?
All right, so number 3, I have a really cool, classic, old school Japanese maple that's been around for a long time, and I think needs to be brought back into heavy production. I always think about that concept of like, man, I don't want to lose some of these special trees, and if nobody talks about them, nobody puts them in their landscape, then those trees can eventually be lost if we don't take care of them. But this is Acer palmatum shigure bato. Now, we talk about a tree that breaks a lot of rules, right? That's what this list has been for me. Things that just characteristics that just kind of make you go, what, and make you really think about what this tree is. So Shigure Bato, it's got an amazing structure to it. It's a spreading habit, semi-arching habit to it. And you think the lace leaf that it has, it looks like a lace leaf, but you're like, wait a minute, is this really a lace leaf? I don't think so. And it gets you more into that kind of traditional Matsumure style leaf. And so it just plays tricks with your mind, because when you think of green lace leaves, you get viridis and all of these different styles. But this is not a true lace leaf. This is a Matsumure. This gives you an insane spreading habit. This thing gets super wide. I remember Carl Munn sent me a picture of one that he had in a ball and burlap. And it looked like something from like the prehistoric times. I could just imagine a dinosaur walking by and taking a nibble out of this thing. Of course, Carl grows everything Jurassic size, right? But like, I always love the texture that this brings, because it gives you a lace leaf feel, but in a spreading, arching habit.
I know this is a tree that you had in Oklahoma, and it was one of the few trees you had in Oklahoma you decided, I've got to have again here in North Carolina.
For sure. Absolutely.
Because when you go from being able to grow a bunch in one spot to going in another spot, you often go in a direction of, let me try something new.
Sure.
But this one was one of your top three. I mean, I'd assumed it was your number two because I knew what your number one was.
Right.
Shigure Bato is very distinctive. That heavy divided leaf that is a Matsumuri makes this tree very special and different in the way that it grows.
Right.
I've seen this grown, and it typically has that wide spreading habit. I've seen some people stake this tree up and let it go to a tree first before it spreads out.
Right.
And that gives an even more unique shape for this tree.
Yeah, what a dynamic present. Yeah, to get height and then the spread. I mean, yeah, this thing just kind of, the shape, I think, really plays a big part in this, and then the texture. And then I'll jump into this part of it too, is why it's so high on my list, is its fall color is absolutely phenomenal. It's like the most purest golden yellow color you've ever seen in your life. And I think what really burned it into my brain was I had this kind of in some deep shade in my garden back in Oklahoma, and I had it near a 8-foot tall dragon tears. Okay. And these two were paired together, and every fall, man, I had this blood red from the dragon tears behind it, and this just glowing yellow, golden yellow out front. I mean, those two together, and just the contrast in texture and shape was just always played so well together. It was like the perfect pair. And so it just really accentuated the cultivar and continued to elevate it year after year when I would see it perform like that. And, also I'll say this about Shigure Bato, just an interesting fact that I would see on the one that I had in Oklahoma. Occasionally it would throw out a little variegated leaf, occasionally, a little sickle on a variegated leaf. And then I've seen that actually same thing happen here. I've never seen this tree variegated. I don't think that it is a variegated plant, but it does have this it wants to be a variegated plant, and I love that about it. It's trying to continue to break the rules. It's already broke so many already, and it's just going to try to keep doing it. So I love that about Shigure Bato. It's an amazing tree.
All right, we're down to your number two Japanese maple. What do you got, Bryan?
All right, so this is crazy that it's my number two, but I think, again, I think it's what gets you excited about cultivars and things in your garden and landscape. I have Acer palmatum Kurohime. Dun, dun, right, number two on my list. Everybody's thinking, what? Kurohime? Okay, here's the deal with this tree, right? This thing is absolutely insane in the spring, right? And what I love about this is that it is the perfect tree form dwarf, right? It's not like the toadstool style. It's not the, it grows like a tree, but it's like the best small little tree that you could possibly imagine in your mind. And I saw one that you guys brought in a 10-gallon, and it was just this hot pink, crazy color, big, thick trunk, perfect tree form, and only about 3 foot tall. And I'm just like, dude, this is absolutely amazing. This in a garden, it just contrasts with everything around it. You're looking at it wow, is this like a bonsai? What is it just really breaks the mold for me when I think about Japanese maples and what you can do with them in your landscape. Gets people excited. I mean, everybody that I've shared a picture of the one that I have is just like, holy cow, that thing is absolutely perfect. It just has the perfect structure. That crazy spring color had to be high on my list.
I like Kurohime because it keeps changing throughout the season.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got that pink color in the spring, which is just outrageous. And then you start getting a blue-green color to it. And then the new growth during the summer is like a purple color.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you keep getting these flushes of new growth over top of this bluish green underneath, and it's just outrageous. And then the fall colors typically give you some bright orange reds. I mean, for a dwarf, it's hard to beat Kurohime. It's one of those plants that is just a rock star.
Absolutely.
And it's dynamic. It's awesome. That strong upright habit to it, like you were talking about. Yeah. That dense, compact habit, it just draws you in. The leaf twists a little bit as well. And so texturally, it's interesting.
Yeah,
visually coloring, it's interesting.
It's got so many great things going for it. I really love that small leaf too, and what I think is kind of interesting about it that I've noted, just giving some detail here, just to describe in more detail, is like the leaf has like this little line rib within each lobe that you can see. It's kind of like the spine of the lobe that's kind of a dark color, and it kind of highlights against that pink color when it's first coming out, and then once it goes to that blue green, you kind of see it even more prominent. And the lobes on the leaf all come to a nice little sharp point. Like, I just love how small the leaf is. It gives it a really like kind of almost like a prickly type texture. You know, when you look at it, it's very pointed. All the lobes are very pointed, very small leaves. But man, I'm telling you, this thing, if you want a dwarf, you're like, man, how do I pick one dwarf Japanese maple out of hundreds, right? Kurohime is going to bring it every time. I'm telling you, like the spring color, that summer new growth over top of that blue green is insane. And the structure, I mean, I was sold. When I saw that, I was like, this has got to be the best dwarf out there.
All right, y'all, we're coming down to Bryan Rules' #1 Japanese maple. If you're watching this on YouTube live, comment in the comment section what you think his #1 Japanese maple is going to be. I've known you for a while, so I've known your #1
Right.
cultivar. We probably mentioned it in a few videos before.
Yeah, we probably have.
Even though we haven't done an official top 5,
Right.
we probably said, oh, that's Brian's favorite cultivar. Brian, what do you have as your #1?
All right. Well, hey, man, if you guys made it this far in the podcast, I appreciate you hanging out with us, because we've been going on these trees. I've got a list of 25. We made it all the way to my #1. You know, me and Sean were talking earlier. He's like, man, how did this become your #1? Well, I'll tell you, man, this is a phenomenal cultivar. My #1 Japanese maple, and has been for 10 plus years. I mean, this tree has always been my #1, and that says a lot, because I've grown a lot of different cultivars. We have Acer, Shirasawanum, Moonrise. Man, this thing is one of the best full moon Japanese maples, in my opinion. I think its colors are just absolutely crazy. The pinks and fuchsia colors that you get in the spring, kind of this orangish pink too, sometimes depending on your sun exposure on that. That large full moon leaf. I mean, it's like, it's the maple that lets you know spring is happening, and get excited because everything it's on its way. And I think you know, when the Shirasawanum world is a really cool place to imagine the possibilities of, because there's not a ton of variances in that, but I think Moonrise is one that's like trying to break that ceiling, right? It's trying so hard to break that ceiling, and I think it does a great job of doing that. This was the centerpiece in my garden, the very first cultivar outside of just your basics. You know, when I first started getting, that's what I was telling Sean. I said, man, you know, what was it about Moonrise? I said, man, it was the first one that I was walking through a garden center, and it just stopped me in my tracks. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What is that? You know, and it just, the insane color that it had at that time, it was just this crazy pink fuchsia color. And I'm like, I didn't know that existed, you know, at the time when I was collecting that color and that leaf style in a Japanese maple. It was amazing.
I think one of the most underrated things about Moonrise is we always talk about the flushes of growth because of how dynamic those are. But the older growth is a lime green.
Yeah.
And that lime green gives a platform for that vibrant new growth to show off on. And the full moon style leaf, the fact that, you know, Moonrise can handle more sun than most Acer Shirasawanum varieties.
Yeah.
I mean, that is pretty spectacular in itself. There's some classic Acer Shirasawanum varieties that are very popular, but they can't handle the sun like Moonrise can.
Right.
And Moonrise, to me, is one of the best Acer Shirasawanums of them all. The color is amazing. I mean, Carl Munn hit it out of the park when he found Moonrise.
Oh, for sure.
And it is a rock star among rock stars. And it's a plant that I don't think we can ever produce enough of, because I think the demand is greater than anything we can produce on Moonrise, because it is such a beautiful tree. It's easy for people to grow. It's vigorous. And for a beautiful full moon Japanese maple, it's hard to beat.
Yeah, it really is. I think the color variation that happens on that plant is just, it contrasts so well within itself. And like you said, once you get into that like summer color, it's just this bright neon green color. And then once you get those new growths over that, it's absolutely a phenomenal plant. You can get some nice yellows and oranges and then going reds late in fall color on moonrise. And I grew this in part sun in Oklahoma, you know what I mean? So like that heat tolerance, I think, is a big factor of why I saw it be successful in my climate, and just continuously putting on a show. And I think it contrasts so well with all the other Japanese maples. That's why I made it the centerpiece in my garden back in Oklahoma. And I had so many crazy colors and everything around it, and it just would draw your eye out there. And it had to be the number one on my list. I've been collecting for a long time, and people always ask me, and it's a hard decision, but Moonrise puts on a show, man. When it comes to the spring color, it's phenomenal.
Now, if you're new to Japanese maples, we've got some interesting Acer species breakdowns here on our podcast. We've got breakdowns of Acer japonicum, Acer shirosabum, Acer sabodianum, and the Heat Seeker series, which include Acer oliveranum. So go check those out if you're wanting to learn more about some of these species, some of these interesting selections in these different categories. We go through and break down the history, what makes these trees Acer japonicum, what makes them Acer shirosabum. So you should definitely check that out. Bryan, I can't thank you enough for jumping in today to shoot your top 25 Japanese maples.
Yeah, man, I'm always excited to be a part of the Mr. Maple Show. It's something that makes me just feel like I'm part of the family, and I always appreciate you guys having me in. It was fun talking about my top 25. I hope that I've brought some attention to some cultivars maybe you hadn't heard of, and if you've heard of them, maybe you give them another look and you're like, hey, all right, maybe I need this in my landscape, because these trees are phenomenal. I think if you had to pick 25 Japanese maples, just order this list, put them in your landscape, and I'm telling you, it's going to be everybody's going to be like, what in the world? You've got the craziest garden in the world. These top 25 right there, they nailed it.
Well, y'all, thank y'all for listening. Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.